That's right. Greetings, fellow armchair Imagineers. Tiki here.
And Rohith Dar.
And Rohit, I gotta tell you, man, I can't put my finger on it, but this setup feels weirdly familiar. Like, it almost feels like it was in a distant dream or something, Rohit. Like a far off memory. It was you and me, and we were doing a podcast about Eternal Sunshine. And then all of a sudden, the walls of the memory started crashing down, Rohit. And you leaned in close to my ear and you whispered one word, and that word was Sunday. Now, Rohit, at first I thought you were just making a reference to the that one SpongeBob episode where he gets the bad breath because of the terrible Sunday. But then I put the pieces together, Rohit. It means that you wanted to meet up Sunday and redo that fateful podcast recording. So here we goddamn are. Oh my god, did I make that elaborate enough for you, Rohit?
And it felt like that was all scripted by the brilliant mind of Charlie Kaufman.
Oh man. I've been preparing that for a couple days now. I'm rather proud of it. All right, so here we are, Rohit. It is Sunday. We may or may not be on a train to Montauk. Let's talk some Eternal Sunshine. We've got Little Blue in the comments as well as Code Gias. Code Gias says he hasn't seen the film but likes when Carey sticks to less serious roles. The Truman Show was boring to him. You know, it was boring to me, Kogias, and I know that you actually defended this in the chat last week. The Majestic. I'm sorry, The Majestic was a painfully boring movie, but we're not here to talk about that. Okay, so it is the 20-year anniversary of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Very big landmark film, not just for art house cinema, but also for Jim Carey's career as a whole. I very much feel like while The Truman Show was him kind of dipping his toes in the well of dramatic acting, this was very much him diving headfirst. So Rohit, as succinctly as you can, tell me how you feel about this film.
It's an amazing film. The direction by Michel Gondry, the writing by Charlie Kaufman, and the acting performances by the entire cast is firing on all cylinders and delivers an emotionally effective, resonant film that touches on memory, love, regret, and the human condition being impacted by those three things.
Yeah. So Rohit, you and I have very different experiences with this movie. You just recently watched it for the first time. I wasn't on the initial wave of hype for it back in 2004. But in 2004, I very much was a student of Ebert and Roeper. And Ebert and Roeper were raving about this thing, so I knew I had to see it. I probably caught it on DVD the next year after it was in theaters. Probably around the time that Jim Carey got nominated for the Oscar for this, I imagine, is the time that I was like, okay, I really do need to sit down and watch this.
He didn't get a nomination for this movie. It's Winslet.
Did he not? Really? Did he not get a nomination for this? Is that a Mandela effect I've always had in my mind?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize, folks. It feels like he should have gotten a nomination for this, but you're right. Winslet did absolutely get a nomination for this. But yeah, so I've always looked at this movie through kind of two lenses. I definitely think that it's I really appreciate the unconventional production design and the editing and everything like that really kind of puts everything into place. This is a very kind of this is almost like Michel Gondry by way of Nolan, with how it's playing around with time and memory and all that. But at the same time, it's also something that Nolan struggles with. It is very much a character study. And it's a character study just about the loss of memory and about the loss of like what we go through as people when we go through these relationships. And is that kind of stuff worth hanging on to. Some very profound stuff in there. I will say on a rewatch, just because I did live through this movie like in its initial hype spell.
Yeah.
I do think that there's some discussion to be had about like, you know, like how responsible is the Kate Winslet character for the manic pixie dream girl archetype, even though she pretty much expressly states in this movie that she does not want to be one of those. I think there's a couple interesting questions to be had in regards to how this movie shaped our perception of romantic comedies moving forward.
Sure.
Okay. We have Richard's Victims in the comments. Nice to see you, man. He says, let's see, random question might not make sense at all, but I feel like this movie was his best acting and Man on the Moon was his best performance. I don't know if that makes sense or not. I think that makes sense because I feel like in Man on the Moon, he was very transformative and he was obviously doing the big method acting thing. He was very literally trying to become Charlie Kaufman. And in this movie, I feel like he's not really trying to play anyone other than Jim Carrey, but he's just playing like a more raw, damaged side of the typical like Jim Carrey man-child role that we know him as. I very much feel like this movie's kind of like the other side of the coin to Punch Drunk Love in that regard. I don't love it as much as Punch Drunk Love, but I feel like it's trying to do similar things.
Yeah, a quick correction. I think you meant Andy Kaufman. I understood the last name's kind of being similar, being the exact same.
Well, yeah. Oh God, yeah. With the Kaufman. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry.
It's good. No, I made this point from the last podcast, and I'll kind of reiterate it just as succinctly as possible. Is that this movie I don't think would have worked as well if anyone but Jim Carrey was playing the role of Joel. And I think Kaufman and Michelle Gondry, the way that they direct and craft the character and through Jim Carrey's performance, you take basically a Jim Carrey character and remove sort of the cartoonish elements and really reduce them to be someone that has a humor to shield away the most dark and vulnerable aspects of his personality. And I think when we get sort of the end of the movie, with regards to sort of him being literally regressed back to his childhood form, there is such a great catharsis and great payoff to Joel's arc about kind of, he is sort of originally this put upon, depressed man, but in going through, it's not like he finds life, the will to live, but I think he finds, in my view, a capacity to understand why he came to this point. And it's not like, oh, everything is great and beautiful. All that. It's like he now has the capacity to live a life autonomously and responsibly. Whereas I think for Joel, and I can relate to a certain extent, is that he lives his life on a bit of autopilot and through and he's really just reacting just to whims and whistles of life. And that was what his relationship was with Clementine. But I think in the aftermath, when he gets to reflect on his memories, when him and Clementine decide to willingly go into a relationship in light of the prior problems, there is a sense of fulfillment in that Joel, he's not just like, oh, I'm a better man, but it's like, I am a more self-aware man, and I am seeking to use that self-awareness to better myself and to feel human and be willing to be vulnerable. And I think there's something beautiful about that it's not like sort of other movies where there's a depressed guy, he goes to trust relations and is in love with life at the end. It's more about, here's a guy who's in a certain state of mind, and through these experiences, kind of out of body experience, he breaks out of this particular like fixed mindset, and he's more cognitively flexible and just more willing to be an adult that lives life and chooses to live right rather than reacting to what goes on in his life.
Yeah, definitely. I think that really one of the things that we can look at with this movie is kind of like the lens of, like I said, I made that manic pixie dream girl comparison.
Sure.
And I really think that if you look at the other kind of like manic pixie dream girl archetypes of the time, so I'm thinking the big ones would probably be like characters like Natalie Portman in Garden State.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking maybe a little bit of Ramona Flowers, although that was a little bit later. 500 Days of Summer for sure.
Yeah.
Is kind of in that mindset. All these kind of all these characters are very similar, but I agree with you. I think the difference between these characters, even someone who does have a lot of agency in their movie, like a Ramona Flowers, they don't have the level of depth and, more importantly, self-awareness that Clementine does. And I think Clementine's self-awareness about the fact that men really view her through this lens of, she is going to be that manic pixie dream girl that is going to save them.
And
I think that adds a really interesting layer to the character, especially because the manic pixie dream girl archetype didn't even really exist when this character was written, which is kind of fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm. I think it's more that I don't think that this kind of character didn't exist. It's more like this character exists in a certain like substrata of life. Like for like guys like Charlie Kaufman, like I think for like people who lived in the indie scene, the more art house, that kind of like film school like space. There was someone like a manic pixie dream girl, or like there's the fantasy of it, because I think and maybe this is self-tell on the part of mostly male artists who make this kind of stories, that they in their mind were those kind of depressed and unfulfilled artists, or just wanting to be an artist, and the manic pixie dream girl is kind of just like a catalyst that to shake them out of their inertia and whatnot. But I think for this movie is that it's an introduction and a deconstruction of that trope, and even in knowing that, I can still see why Joel would be attractive, and she has sort of a magnetic quality.
The movie even actively acknowledges Joel is very, very upfront about like, yeah, I remembered every word of that speech, and even after that speech, I still thought that you would save my life. That to me is almost one of the most powerful statements in the whole film for me personally, I think.
Yeah. And I think what's especially interesting is that like there is sort of this I think what this movie does well is that it's not like Joel is kind of put upon and like life's done him wrong. I think Joel has just had a certain way of looking at the world. And when you look at like he has this very artistic sensibility and detail, and he has like this beauty about that he sees life, but he just doesn't feel comfortable to share that and be open with someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we get sort of like, I know this is maybe a little Freudian cliche at this point, with sort of the mommy issues at play, but I think there is something to be said on Joel's part that he has a very myopic view about women, and I think with his relationship with Clementine, a girl that he saw one way, even with that like explicit self-awareness, I think what went to Joel's head is like, oh, she's not like the other girls. Not that Joel wouldn't say express that, but I think I know guys that would experience that speech and would still go about it because there's a magnet, like, oh, you're like a girl that has these like this magic about her, but you're self-aware, and
the fact that the self-awareness in itself is like
part of the magic.
Right, yeah.
And I think over the course of that relationship, and for me, so when I watched the movie, when we had sort of the introduction and then transition to like I didn't realize it's such a cool stylistic thing that their introduction is not the actual first time they were introduced. Like this is after the mind swipe thing, and it's like, oh,
that to me is like the most Nolan-esque element of this whole movie for me is the that kind of looping back around, and it takes a while for the movie. The movie does take its sweet ass time to even to even get to the setup of what is actually going on, which I really respect.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if because of the way like Joel is experiencing his memory loss, and that there's not like a linear structure. It's like, oh, you start from point A to Z and then just lose the memory at a time. It's just kind of like I think just how like for us, for normal humans, when we make associations, there's not linear associations. So I think in terms of the editing of the film, it being edited in such a way that we don't necessarily have a bearing or sense of like sequence or cause and effect, that puts us in the mindset of someone like Joel when he's undergoing the procedure. And thus we have less, oh, A leads to B leads to C. It's more like A, B, C, all the letter, you're experiencing all sort of the emotional affectations at once. When you go from specifically from the scene of like Joel and Clementine's quote unquote introduction to Joel just crying as he's just driving through, it's a sharp, tonal whiplash, but it's so effective in the sense that, there's the comfort of certain memories can then erode or change it to something more sad. And it's kind of like, I think of like Inside Out, like a happy memory can turn to a sad or even a bittersweet memory.
Sure. Let's see. Richard's Victims is saying watching this film made me wish Jim Carrey did a Nolan movie, and yeah, I'm kind of with you there. Honestly, I feel like there's a few actors that I wish would have done Nolan movies in their career. Philip Seymour Hoffman is a big one of them for me. But yeah, I definitely think that. Granted, obviously Jim Carrey's still with us, but I think more or less his acting career is done, according to him.
Yeah, I think the fact that like Christopher Nolan had the fortune of working with Robin Williams and getting such a great performance out of it in Insomnia, and you kind of wonder what Chris Nolan could have done with Jim Carrey at that time.
Exactly. All right, where do you want to go from here?
I'm fine with, since you've sort of been with this film as strong. I'd be curious if you have any questions for someone like me who's just watched the film recently and thus is coming away kind of with as fresh a perspective as I can in 2024.
Sure. Well, let's just let's get into one of the big meat and potatoes elements of the movie, which is the production design and the editing. You already touched on the editing and the non-linear quality, but I feel like that with the production design is like, it's not super flashy, but it's just in your face enough to really get a sense of scale for exactly how monumental what's going down actually is within this guy's mind.
Yeah, no, it's not like there's not an extravagance, like everything's going to ashes or just instantly disappearing. There is this kind of like slow build up. And I think it's sort of, I think the way the production design, I would call it, it's sort of taking like claymation principles or the way claymation figures like move or objects move and incorporating that into the production design of memories, like kind of ebbing, flowing, or dissolving. And that I felt was like really cool. Because I think it kind of leads to sort of the idea of like the mind being like clay that you kind of mixing and molding, and in certain places when you're taking out memories, you're just taking out pieces of the clay, so you can still mold things, but it's not sort of its original form or original mass of composition, which I think was really interesting.
Let's see. What do you think of just some of the more fantastical set pieces, like the childhood stuff, the stuff with Joel under the table and in the sink and stuff like that? Do you think like that was maybe a little bit too stylistically out there, or do you think it kind of fit right in with the surrealist quality of the film?
I think it was a really apt place for those things to have occurred, because I think, like I said, like Joel had this sort of repression and he slowly loses his memories. And I think when we get to that juncture, I can imagine like if a studio executive saw this portion, it's like, oh no, like audiences will not get it. This is a way too not so normal artistic. But when you really sit with it, it's Joel being laid bare emotionally, and him just talking, like him and Clementine having the voiceover with just them as kids and the kids kind of acting out. I thought it was really beautiful in a sense, because like for as much as you can imagine Joel having sort of his particular childhood traumas, even for Clementine, even though we don't know much about her past, I can still feel that she also had some level of childhood traumas that impact the way she interacts with the world. And I think for Jim Carrey, this is why Jim Carrey, in my view, is probably the most aptly cast, is because if you were to have any other actor do sort of the man-child segments where he's like, oh, I'm a little baby, or have the cape and all that stuff, or be under the table, any other actor would just make it feel hokey and like awkward and just not have a sense of verisimilitude. But Jim Carrey, this is kind of the idea of, like, for example, like Henry Fonda in like Once Upon a Time in the West is like he's a good guy actor that then does something bad and shocking. And this is that we're taking what we understand as Jim Carrey, and he's kind of doing a Jim Carrey thing of like him being like a child or whatever. Like you could take that moment and recut it to be like, oh, this is like Jim Carrey acting like a Jim Carrey baby, whatever. And but with this undercurrent of like, oh, this is a maladjusted individual, there is a sense of true reckoning and true honesty about how much Joel needs to sort of grow up. And I think the fact that he makes me say, oh, I don't want to lose his memories. The purpose of this machine is sort of allowing adults to run away from their problems, from their traumas, and that's not what real life is. It's not about just forgetting what happened and what affected you. It's about sort of making peace with those memories and moving on. And I think for when Joel and Clementine are actually hearing their interviews and why and what they felt about the other person, it's such a unique way of kind of using therapy where like, oh, this is what I feel, and this is the other person feeling, like couple therapy, and they react to it. It's like, oh, they're hearing it, and they kind of feel horrified for how they talk about the other person. And I think there's just something really like humanistic about it, because for such a technology to exist, the rock could be like, oh, here are these toxic people, and this technology reveals how bad it was, and you're just doing them a favor. And utilize this technology, you can take it away sort of. I think to like Joss Whedon's Dollhouse, and by the memory and personality, it's like you can like you can just sort of erase away sort of what's there on the canvas, but the art or paints are still there, and so for Clementine, especially Kristen Dunst's character, I'm forgetting her name, Mary. They still have echoes of their prior lives, which leads you to make certain decisions. So it kind of leads to this interesting ideas like, okay, if your memories were kind of taken away from you, even if you're not fully that person, there's still a part of you that's there that kind of influences your actions on a subconscious level, which I think is really done well with Clementine's relationship with Patrick and Mary's relationship with Mark Ruffalo's character and Tom Wilson's character.
Yeah, and I also think as far as perfect casting goes, I think Elijah Wood as Patrick is also just perfect casting because that guy is such a creep when he's doing anything other than playing Frodo Baggins. And I totally fully buy that this guy would be a character who would do something like this and take advantage of the situation like he does.
Yeah. And his name's Patrick. It's like, no offense to anyone who's named Patrick in real life. Y'all are cool. But I think it's sort of an interesting idea. And I'm kind of glad that like the people that are sort of being unethical about this is like the movie doesn't kind of, breeze past that issue. It's confronted head on, and actually sort of the moral reckoning that comes from it leads to, I think, a better outcome for the people that go through this procedure where they can have sort of the memories or have the understanding. And I think there's an empowerment to, it's like, okay, you erase these memories about so-and-so person, and you're looking back at those memories as kind of like a weird outside observer. You have the choice to decide whether you want to engage with that person or not. And if you engage, it's like you have sort of this like information. That's not just to say for Joel and Clementine, they could probably still break up after a year or two together. But I think
I think that's exactly what the ending is spelling out. The ending is spelling out like, look, this is not going to be the end all be all relationship of our lives. We're not going to be like, like the Carl and Ellie of this universe, but there's good on the other side of it. There is stuff to seek out in terms of a relationship, even one that is destined to fail, and we know it's going to fail.
Well, I think it's more specifically in my mind. I think it's not. I think, God, I know there's a cliche, and I remember like 500. I think there's a what I don't know, trying to remember the movie, but it's like it's not a love story, but it's a story about love.
500 Days of Summer.
500 Days of Summer, yes. So I think that quote specifically applies to Joel and that comes, even though they have a love, they have a care for one another. I think it's a movie about the idea of love, not because and not evaluating, not because it's liberating or it's wonderful. It's painful. It's traumatic. It can rip your guts out, but it makes one feel alive. And I think the whole idea of sort of losing your memories and losing sort of a part of yourself, losing your humanity, there's something really affirming to me that these two characters have gone through such a strong, traumatic personal experiences. They choose to go out there not because they think they can do better, and like that kind of like Tobias Funke and his wife. It's like, oh, they don't miss the odds. I think we have a good chance. And the delusion about it. It's more like, even if it fails, I want to have the sense of bravery to go out there. And
I mean, this is kind of like the ultimate cliche when it comes to relationships, but it's very much it is better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all kind of situation.
Yeah, and I think for Joel and Clementine, even if their love for each other ends, I think after, if the relationship ends, I feel like that they still would care for one another and respect each other. And I think for any future relationships they bring embark afterwards, they are likely to be in a much healthier place, to not go to a sense of forgetting and shutting down or repressing. It's about feeling, understanding, and moving past said memory and past pain, and being a human that can live and move. And I think that's sort of the thing that for us, that's the takeaway, for our lives, is that we don't have the means of erasing our baggage or past memories or past relationships, but we should have the opportunity to look at them from an outside perspective, see what went wrong or what went right, and take away with that knowledge to hopefully do better or try to do better, and have the sense of appreciating what each relationship can be, even though not every one of them can be great, but not every one of them can be bad. And there's something to learn and appreciate and grow as a person. And I think that's something that most people will say and will say, hey, but it's very hard to do, because you're putting your most innermost self out there for someone else to either nurture or care for, or to trample down and destroy.
Right. So there's basically two more things I want to get into with this movie. One of them is the idea that Joel and I swear to God, I almost called her Ellie. I'm like, that is The Last of Us.
Clementine.
This movie. Yeah, Joel and Clementine. The idea that they are probably pretty toxic, which I do think there's some interesting stuff to mine there.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I think we should probably end on just the ethics of the company in general,
sure,
and like the Tom Wilkinson character of it all.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are two areas that we should probably explore. So yeah, I will say that in the era of everyone being like hyper vigilant about like, oh my God, that relationship is toxic AF and we shouldn't celebrate it.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that Joel and Clementine's relationship is kind of toxic AF. Mm-hmm. I don't know. That is the one thing that I feel I am conflicted on in this movie, because frankly, I just don't really think that these two are good together. Like, I totally get what you're saying. I totally get what the movie's trying to say about how, like, yeah, in spite of the hardships, there is good and there is a lot of meaningful stuff to mine from the relationship. That being said, like, she's a manipulative alcoholic user, mm-hmm. and he is just kind of gonna be a puppy dog and go along with whatever until it's inevitably too late, and he should have stood up for himself a long time ago, but instead he's let it fester like an infected wound.
And then lashes out in really hurtful ways.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, Rohit. Like, that is the one thing that, coming back to this movie all these years later, I do struggle with that component to it. I honestly, obviously Kaufman was wanting to make the characters three-dimensional, and, like, they're not written to be like, these perfect rom-com characters by any means. Like, sure. Again, I think a good way to compare it would be like, you have the characters in Garden State, where it's like basically the whole element of their character is like, oh, they're on meds, but it's okay. They're just quirky, you know. They are quirky people. That's all that their problem is. Whereas with Eternal Sunshine, it's like, no, it's like right from the jump, it's like we are getting into some very dicey character when it comes to co-mingling with people.
Codependency, yeah, no.
Yeah.
So, to address that thing, I don't disagree that there is a toxic element to the relationships, but I think I would have felt on your side or on your wavelength had there not been that scene about sort of the new versions of Joel Clementine listening to those to their conversations or descriptions about them. Because I think the point is not to say that I don't think Charlie Kaufman and Michelle Gondry are going, in my view, I think they wouldn't say that, oh, if Joel Clementine were to do this relationship, it's like zero problems or they won't become toxic. I think for me, the point was that for Joel and Clementine, they had very maladjusted behaviors in regards to dealing with traumas with their prior behaviors and all that stuff. And in going through such a toxic and really hurtful relationship, and then going through this incredible process of deleting their memories and whatnot, they come to a place to where they're aware of what their problems are, and hopefully they can use that to try to solve their problems. I don't think Charlie Kaufman, if you were to say, oh, and then what if they break up in a year or two? Say, yeah, they break up and maybe they'll have issues. But I think for me, it's less about, oh, this relationship is toxic or not. Not to say you're engaging in a binary, but I think it's more like, okay, there are these problems, there are these issues. Can we, as people, if being aware of it, can we make an honest effort to be better or strive to be better for ourselves and for our partners? And if that doesn't work out for that is not necessarily an end for us from finding love as a whole, or necessarily an end in us being better people altogether. And I think that's sort of, for me, my takeaway is that if things don't work out for Joel and Clementine, I think my hope is that they've gone through such a transformative experience that they learn to be better people, if by their own or with different people. And that's, I think it's less about, oh, we are not going to be in a toxic place anymore. It's like there's always going to be some level of toxicity that we as human beings are going to deal within ourselves, within our peers, family, whatnot, in life. It's a matter about how do we fight against said toxicity. And I don't think we'll ever be in a point in our lives that would be zero toxicity or everything's fucking good. But it's like, what is the resilience? What is the drive? What is our will to be better or just to love rather than to hate or hurt? And I know that seems sort of very like it can be sentimental or it can be trite, but I think there is an earnestness to wanting to have a second chance. And if the chance doesn't work out, at least you have the human opportunity to go further and all that. I think this movie is not, in my view, I think it's not the point is not about whether Clementine and Joel are toxic or not for each other. It's about, okay, whether they are toxic and to what degree that toxicity can be fixed or not. Do they have the capability, and do we as human beings have the capability to lessen our toxicity, if not just in a relationship context, just in a general life context? And I think that's kind of where the movie really gets at. And the idea of memory is both a source and a solution to that kind of toxicity. And I think that's something that I really like, the Eternal Sunshine, Spotless mindset. If you erase your memories, erase kind of who you were and the baggage that comes with it, we'll look from an opposite perspective. Do we have the opportunity to then do better? If we don't get 100% right, at least hopefully we can have this sense of knowledge to just be less shitty, day to day. And then eventually it'll amount to something big. You won't notice it at first, but that's kind of my hope, is that these are things that will take a lifetime for Joel Clementine to achieve. And I think they'll hopefully become better people, whether with each other or not. And I think that's kind of the whole point of the movie, is that it's not about finding love or seeking love, whatever. It's about the idea of love as a verb, is that you love is an act of self-care, care towards others, and you're constantly wanting to be a better person and getting outside your maladjusted toxic behaviors. And that's not something that you'll be successful at each day, every minute, every hour, every second. But the effort to try and to hopefully just win out for most of the time is a small victory that I think most people can hope to get and just seize on and just have to keep going. And that's kind of maybe, I don't know if that's just me being a really optimistic person by nature, or just, I think that was sort of, I felt was the point from the process, is that it's not about erasing memory and just putting that aside. It's about taking memory, taking sort of the history you have with the person or with yourself, and looking back at it, it's like, my history has given me this predetermined path. Can I have the autonomy and willpower to change that path? And whether I will veer too far from my predetermined path, that's one thing. But can I have the choice and action to just do it? And that's hope, right? You know, hope is not you will get great future, is that you will have the possibility to seek a better future for yourself. And that's sort of my takeaway from Joel Compton, is that they're not trying to just get back together and have best relationship. They're just trying to be better people. And hopefully they can do that with each other. If not, hopefully they can do it with themselves or other people. So, yeah.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that, when I call them toxic, I'm not trying to be like a keyboard warrior.
No. I get that. I think for me, I think the movie acknowledges that toxicity, and I think it's up to us, where maybe if we were in that same situation, maybe we might not make the decision to do so. But I think there are certain people that could feel beneficial to have that kind of experience, where maybe they see the baggage of memories they have with a person from an outside perspective, and really kind of reckons like, well, can I have the opportunity to have a better relationship or a better future with this person? And if I can, maybe I should try. If I don't do it, at least I gave us opportunity to change and maybe, not have my life be predetermined, have some sense of agency. And I think that's sort of the difference, like agency in yourself, and especially agency towards how you live through other people.
All right. Okay, so I think the last thing we really need to shine a light on is just the company itself. One of the big things that Dragon wanted to emphasize was the Tom Wilkinson performance, because I really think that he is kind of like both the main antagonist of the movie, and then ultimately, weirdly, the storyline with him is almost kind of like the heart of the movie in some ways. I don't say that like he's a happy-go-lucky guy and we love seeing him on screen, but I say that just as far as like what he goes through and what the Kirsten Dunst character goes through. It really is just kind of like the amalgamation and breakdown on why, kind of like the other end of the coin of like, okay, like, where with Joel and Clementine, it's like, yeah, maybe they should give it another go around, even though there were toxic elements. But then obviously with something like this, where there's all sorts of sketchy power dynamics and, age differences and potential grooming involved here.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is a situation where you probably want to erase it for good, but at the same time, it's still a messed up thing to do. And it's basically just waving a Men in Black sort of memory wipe pen in her face and being like, boop, you don't remember that? And it obviously fucks with her whole perception of reality, and it is very disruptive. So I do think that ultimately, obviously the film is trying to tell us that no matter what, even if it's for something that is like a clearly negative experience, you still want to hold on to that just for the life experience and the,
See, I kind of hear your thoughts on this. When I think about sort of the potential of technology, I feel like the most ethical way this technology can only be used if this were to exist in the real world is like people that were survivors of SA, or
Mhm.
people that are like survivors of war, PTSD, or even like refugees or whatnot. And I think that kind of complicates this is not like the ethics of erasing said memories, but also it's like the part of the procedures that you have to take certain objects or
It's
things.
basically the fact that the abuser is literally doing it to the victim in this situation. That's what makes it messed up.
No, I get that, but I'm just thinking just more like imagine if you had some traumatic experience, but you wanted to erase it, but it's like you don't have the items because they're in a faraway country or they're destroyed or whatever. And so it's like it's such a kind of an interesting idea that like in order to erase your memories, you have to willingly kind of find items and objects that give you certain memories, certain sensations, and basically relive through that trauma as you're trying to erase it, which is a real, which I think it's done well and done well with the editing, and especially with the sort of the a Clockwork Orange style setup with the projection slide and the eye look on. And I think yeah, no, for in regards to sort of the ethics of like just how, I think like the fact that the movie said like it's literally brain damage, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, it's like I think to your point, it's like okay, you're taking someone else's memories, and but the thing is, whoever's out doing this procedure, they have access to the most intimate information about you. They basically have access to your psychology. And I think part of that point is I feel like for people who go to like therapy and like therapist office, like obviously like people who work there, it would be an ethical violation to date the patients or whatever. I mean the therapist, but people work at the therapist's office. So it's that same degree, those ethics probably apply. But unfortunately, the people that we see here just do not operate by the ethics. Only Mark Ruffalo is the only morally like.
And even Mark Ruffalo, I feel like he's clearly out of the three, he's got the most moral fiber. But I feel like there's still a little bit of ambiguity about how much he might have known about Mary. I don't know. I feel like it's not clear that he was completely in the right in that situation. But I don't know. I feel like the film leaves it up in the air.
I guess like in if you're gonna ask me, I feel like he had enough suspicions
Uh-huh.
but didn't know whether or not that the relationship that was had was necessarily romantic. It could have been a thing that like maybe she was like an estranged daughter to the doctor in his mind. It's like,
Or
oh
maybe it was one of those things where like she was just looking at him as a father figure.
yeah. And so
Right.
that's sort of the rationalizations that I think a lot of people would unfortunately do. That's not to say he's necessarily right to just not investigate and see like, okay, are we doing something right in how Mary's operating? And I think and I can't and I feel really bad at all these actors are great. Kristen Dunst, I feel for her emotionally that and realizing she kisses like Dr. Escherbuck, like Tom Wilkinson's character, and looking through her file, there is like like a violation, the sense of that you're not in control of your own like soul, right? That your
Mhm.
soul was just cut off, and the person who cut off the soul, it just has you as your employee. He knows about you, and I mean, like it's a nightmare for like HR or for any lawyer that imagine being a lawyer that represented the company for
Totally.
it would be a fucking mess. And I think with the way this technology is, there if such technology exists, there would have to be so much regulation, so much like
I mean,
process.
we see pretty firsthand in the film that this is not like foolproof technology. Like there are, all it takes is like hearing a sentence that the person that you're trying to erase would say to you or something like that.
Yeah.
Like little memory triggers that are almost impossible to kind of like account for and predict on.
Yeah, it's not like I think the way because I remember going back to Dallas or the way it's like erasing memory is not like erasing contents of a tape. It's like kind of erasing like what you wrote on on a paper or like erasing like a whiteboard. Is that it's not there, but there's still like echoes or marks to indicate that something was written or whatever. So I think that's kind of how for this process, that's how the brain is. At least as crude of a metaphor as it can be, right? And I think part of it is like I think for the company, this probably the rationalization is like, well, if people are going this far, I think part of it is like that's why you try to get all the items that have those memory associations, so that way you have the least likelihood of any of those things happening, right? And
Sure.
whether whether those people like bump into each other and said something, then you can only account for so much in your control, right? And that's, I guess, like this would be easier to do in like a big city, but like doing this like in a small ass town in the middle of nowhere in the U.S., like it would be hard
to. yeah, for sure. All right. Let's see. Is there any other elements to this movie we really need to break down? I feel like we're kind of closing in on our time here.
Just as a general statement, the music that's playing when Joel's like driving and crying, and the music that's playing at the end credits of the movie, this is a great soundtrack. Like I'm not really much of like indie rock guy. I'll appreciate some indie rock, but the music and the soundtrack in this movie is really good.
I feel like this was an era of great indie rock soundtracks. Again, the aforementioned Garden State very much comes to mind. I feel like the Garden State soundtrack is like more well known and liked nowadays than the actual movie is. But I feel like this soundtrack, I do agree. I feel like it really, like, whereas I feel like those other soundtracks, they're good soundtracks, but they're almost kind of like more just collections of songs that happen to be playing in the movie that give it a vibe. Whereas this, it feels very deliberate. This, it almost feels like a mixtape that was put together specifically to conjure up all these emotions. And I really appreciate it when a soundtrack can do that.
Well, I think it helps that for Michel Gondry's part, he's done music videos. So I think maybe that experience helps to sort of make sort of the music being integrated into scenes not feel like, oh, this is the needle drop. As a lot of movies, especially a lot of movies lately, kind of had this issue.
You've seen Civil War, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's a great example of a movie that just does not know how the fuck to use needle drops, man.
Yeah, honestly, that's like my main pet peeve issue with that movie is that there's the needle drops. I feel like this movie could have gone with just a score or even silence. That I think would make the movie so fucking effective. Sweet diversion. Yeah, and I think the soundtrack, it's haunting, it's evocative, and it's really beautiful. And I think that's a real, like, when you're having songs that were made for this movie that just fit with sort of the vibe and the tone. And even Michel Gondry's music video directing, he knows how to, I think, kind of, sort of that sort of seeing that segment of the movie where it's just like Joel's like seeing all these things are like disappear and shaft and like, vanish. It feels very much kind of like the beginnings of like a music video before the music's playing. It's just kind of like a
sure.
So I think that's kind of a cool way of going about sort of this, memory deletion.
All right. Well, I think we are more or less caught up on everything. Any final thoughts on your end, Rohit? I'm very glad that, unlike last time, we were able to get through this conversation without the fabrics of our memory breaking down on us.
I think this is a film that I really appreciate. It's a great film in terms of the direction, writing, performances, production design, everything about it. It's probably my favorite film, 2004. And this is a film that I will not be seeking the services of Lacuna Incorporated to erase from my memory. And, for this lovely conversation we've had and with very minimal interruptions, I also will not have this conversation be erased from my memory as well.
All right. That first one, though, I don't know. I might need to make some calls. All right. Big thanks to Richard's Victims, Little Blue, and a very brief cameo from Kogias. Y'all rock. Miyazaki is coming, folks. That's right. Miyazaki. I'm going to drop that big tease right at the end here. Have a good one, folks. See y'all later.